Gate Shift. 28 lands in this Gate Shift deck. Love it. It's 2 Field of the Dead, then a lot of mana sources otherwise. Those Plazas of Harmonies, as you mentioned, for other utility lands.
Now, one thing I'm worried about with this Gate Shift deck is that you're just a little slow.
Start on a tapped Hallowed Fountain and versus a tapped Breeding Pool. Go back to Dufour. Drowned Catacomb is a second land. Ooh, this,
Yeah, we have some mixed up signals here. I actually watched David Dufour yesterday playing. This is not right either. We're going to get this fixed for you.
Yeah, so we'll get these players figured out. I'm not sure what's going on here, but we have Hero Precinct 1. Looks like we have an Esper strategy, not a Gate Shift strategy.
Yeah, I think we just got our signals crossed. I believe the player on the right is definitely playing Esper Hero. I'm not 100% exactly what happened. We might have the wrong deck list in the database, but we're going to get that figured out for you. But for now, we have Temur Elementals on the left and Esper Hero on the right.
Leafkin Druid versus Hero into Thought Erasure is what we're looking at. So our Elementals player looks like a Risen Reef being reached for as a target there. And then we see Chandra Awaken Inferno in the hand. Copy of Omnath. Cavalier Thorns, so basic Mountain. I believe that's a Living Twister in the middle.
Yeah, so this okay. We were going over the Gate Shift deck. We'll just talk about this matchup in particular. So this Esper Hero deck is predicated on kind of breaking your opponent down to the lowest common denominator of what your deck does. Thought Erasure, removal spells, sometimes a few counter spells here and there can really shut you down, and those static effects on Teferi, Time Raveler, as well as Narset Parter of Veils really kind of consolidate what your deck is doing down to the smallest things it could possibly do. It really restricts you as far as development is concerned. The Temur deck is all about value, and luckily Risen Reef actually gets through something like Narset Parter of Veils, so you do have some play even in the face of those really powerful Planeswalkers.
So Dufour ends up taking the Omnath with a discard spell. That'll protect Hero of Precinct 1. That was already online as a kill spell.
And with the Leafkin Druid on 2, that was just coming down like 100% on turn 3 to kill that Hero of Precinct 1. So heads up pick from Dufour.
We'll see how Johnson wants to follow up. We know that he at least has Risen Reef available this turn. Could play that Living Twister. That one's not terribly exciting just yet. Risen Reef is where he'll start. He'll play the basic Mountain and cast that. Steam Vents will enter tapped off the Reef. We'll go back to Dufour.
He might have changed it the day of or something. It's fine.
Oath of Kaya is the cast. That'll make a hero token. Risen Reef will be hit by the Oath, Dufour to 23.
Yeah, that also creates another token, which is nice, and really keeping the pressure on. But Risen Reef's already gained its value. Not only did it draw a card, but it accelerated Johnson a little closer to playing something like Big Chandra this turn. Awakened Inferno, as we've seen so far, has been quite powerful.
Hero and the token attack. Looks like the 0-3 jumps in front of the 2-2. 1 point comes across. Johnson to 19.
What I really like about Johnson's build is not only the shocks, but the lava coils, or sorry, the lightning strikes. Actually give him some play against these Hero Precinct 1s as well as the Planeswalkers from Esper Hero. And thanks to Chandra Acolyte of Flame, he can actually rebuy some of those and accrue value even outside of having those Risen Reefs on the battlefield.
So we still know about a Cavalier of Thorns in Johnson's hands. We also know about a Chandra Awakened Inferno, and he's shocking for a 6th land.
Yeah, this has to be an Awakened Inferno before it gets hit with a discard. Going to minus and clean up all of these creatures from the Esper Hero side, almost 100%.
Yeah, so Chandra is the play. Shocking to 17 for a Stomping Ground.
Now, the sad part is if he does -3, a second Oath of Kaya from Dufour can actually take the Chandra out. So he's really contemplating just ticking up and giving an emblem, and that's what he's going to go for. It's going to send the Chandra down to 4 from the attacks from the creatures, though.
Yeah, Chandra up to 8, emblem on you, Dufour to 22 in the upkeep. Let's see what he can do about this Chandra.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the emblems are basically controlled by the Esper Hero player, right? So, if I'm not mistaken, the emblems cannot kill planeswalkers. I believe that's how it works.
So the redirect rule is not really a thing anymore. It just deals 1 damage to you.
Oh, sure. That makes more sense.
We'll see what Dufour can do about it. As you mentioned, there's 4 power on the table that could deal with half of a Chandra. That still leaves enough loyalty for the sweeper effect on Johnson's next turn.
Yeah, Dufour actually has a couple options here too, though. Teferi, Time Raveler in hand, can just play and bounce the Leafkin Druid, making another token, kind of forcing Johnson to minus on the following turn. He can also just attack the Chandra for 4, play Teferi, bounce his own Oath of Kaya, and give him a better shot at killing it on the following turn, especially if Johnson goes for that minus.
Starts by giving the Chandra a read. Wants to make sure he's got the situation on lock.
Yeah, this Chandra is unique in that it can directly hurt creatures as a targeted effect, while also having an area of effect, like an AoE on the -3.
Use Thought Erasure to take that Cavalier of Thorns, sees that the Living Twister is still there, as well as a breeding pool. Creatures come in, Chandra knocked down to 4.
Now, Dufour also has Tyrant Scorn in hand, which he could use to either protect his Hero Precinct 1 from the Chandra's sweeper effect. He can also use it to kill the Leafkin Druid or the Living Twister if he wants to make sure that the follow-up from Johnson is not that big of a deal.
As it stands, this Chandra is really about all that Johnson's up to. The Twister's okay, the Druid's just a mana source. We'll see how he navigates it as we go to Johnson's turn.
If I'm Johnson, I'm definitely looking to clear here. I would have probably cleared last turn, even in the face of a second Oath of Chandra, just because the Hero Precinct 1 can get a little out of hand and eventually pressure Chandra anyway.
Here's a tap of 4. Signals a fresh draw step. It's Omnath.
Well, now you don't really have to do that so much. So I'm curious how Johnson actually ends up navigating the rest of this turn and how David responds with that Tyrant Scorn.
Yeah, Leafkin Druid plus Omnath means that this trigger is good for 2 damage. Conveniently, that's the toughness of Hero Precinct 1, and that'll be the target.
Yeah, but in response, he can Tyrant Scorn on the Leafkin Druid. That would actually make it so the Omnath only did 1, but instead he's just going to bounce the hero, making a token, and maybe force Johnson here to minus to clean up these 4 1/1s.
So Tyrant Scorn does bounce the hero. Johnson is going to play that breeding pool tapped.
Yeah, may have mistapped his mana a little bit. Is unable to actually cast the Living Twister this turn.
Omnath trigger pumps the Druid. Chandra goes up to 6. 2 emblems now on Dufour.
Okay. I actually really like how Christopher's playing this. He's keeping the loyalty pretty high. He knows these Esper decks don't really play a whole lot in the way of actually dealing with Planeswalkers, other than Teferi here of Dominaria and Oath of Kaya and multiples. And so if he keeps the loyalty 4 or higher, and which he can do right now with these 2 blockers, he's making it so Dufour's Oath of Kaya is just not really going to do a whole lot.
Yeah, that +1/+1 counter on the Leafkin Druid, pretty significant, allowing it to block these tokens as well.
Right. I think at some point Johnson is going to probably end up minusing the Chandra to clean things up, but he's going to end up with 2 emblems out of the deal or more, and Dufour is going to be left with very little, just spending so many resources trying to pressure this Chandra.
So Dufour fell to 18 at the upkeep from those emblems. We know there's a Hero of Precinct 1 in hand. We also know that the Surveil from the Thought Erasure was kept on top last turn. Glacial Fortress will be land number 5.
Now, I know at some point Dufour missed a 4th land drop, but I thought he had a Watergrave in hand. I think this Glacial Fortress might have been the keep on top, so he can double spell this turn with a Time Raveler and something else.
So here's a Time Raveler. It's going to go down to 1. Bounce the Druid. Draw a card.
Attention Magic players, this is a last call for For today's 11:13 alternate challenge, if you would like to play in today's 11:13,
I think I really underestimated how much loyalty
make your way to
this new Chandra has. The Awakened Inferno is just starts at 6, ticks up to 8. You know, can protect itself in multiple ways, and looks like Dufour is just having a really tough time of it, trying to keep this Planeswalker in check through attacks.
Dufour sent 3 of the tokens at the Chandra. 2 came across. Chandra's Dufour, and he's just passing back. He had to hold that Hero Precinct 1 because he doesn't want it to get swept by this Chandra.
Something kind of cool Johnson could do here. Play the Living Twister, bounce a land, replay the land to put a counter on the Omnath, or just bounce the land and throw the land at the token and then attack down the Teferi.
So Chandra goes up to 6, 3rd emblem on Dufour. Omnath is going to attack the Planeswalker, so Oath of Kaya triggers. Johnson to 15, Dufour to 20. And Teferi goes down. Things looking pretty good for Johnson so far. I've been really impressed by Chandra Awakened Inferno basically every time we've seen it cast this weekend. We did see it lose 1 game.
For sure, but I think that was mostly due to the strength of Ether Gust. You know, we saw, I forget who it was. It wasn't Dylan Hand, was it?
It was not.
No, Abe Corrigan.
Yes.
It was Abe Corrigan, and he utilized Ether Gust not only to just put it on top of the deck, but he got to minus a Tamio to get it back to effectively counter it with it on the deck. And his opponent was just never able to get a second Chandra emblem, and he was able to eventually win in time because he started with a pretty high life total. But
so now the Living Twister shows up for Johnson. This one is an elemental from an older set, suddenly becoming more relevant.
Yeah, when Living Twister was first previewed, I actually thought it might be a pretty solid card, at least a sideboard card in like kind of mid-range decks against aggro. Not only does it have 5 toughness, so it dodges Lava Coil, but you get to pitch extra lands and just toss them at creatures. Just seems really strong. And here we're seeing it, you know, in this Elementals deck, it's just acting as another Elemental, but there are these, you know, land-based effects with Risen Reef and Omnath that, you know, all you really want are those landfall triggers from Living Twister sometimes.
So there's a Narset for Dufour. He minus adds a 3. I believe Command the Dread Horde picked up.
Yeah, but he's starting to get chunked here by the Chandra, and I don't know if he can afford to pay that much life.
Yeah, not seeing a great way to recoup that kind of life loss here so far. Here's a replacement Teferi Time Raveler. Johnson thinking about responding. Must have picked up an instant, perhaps a Lightning Strike. Yeah, Lightning Strike it is. That's going to go for the Narset. So Narset down. Here comes Teferi. Teferi to 1, bounce the Living Twister, draw a card.
This is still just kind of bad news for Dufour. You know, he's got those 3 Chandra Awakened Inferno emblems kind of, you know, the Dufour continues to burn. Just hitting him every turn. There's going to be another emblem coming next turn from Johnson. And he's got to find a way to win this game pretty quickly here, or those emblems are just going to eat him up.
2 of the tokens attack the Chandra. Chandra now down to 4 as we go back to Johnson. Still in a pretty commanding position here. Chandra has just kind of been unchecked ever since it was cast.
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of chipped away at by these, you know, Hero Precinct 1 tokens, but never has really been in that much danger, never got below 4 loyalty. And Johnson just, you know, kind of milking it for all it's worth here, just putting emblem after emblem onto the battlefield for Dufour and just, you know, he's taking 4 damage a turn. How do you get out of this?
Yeah, it's going to be rough. And here's Creeping Trailblazer for Johnson, as well as the Living Twister redeployed.
Yeah, not really a great defensive card here, but, you know, It's a fine. The Trailblazer is a way to apply pressure here, and with the 4 emblems just kind of munching away on Dufour's life total, it's not going to take too much damage here to get the job done.
Yeah, as you mentioned, Chandra to 6, emblems to 4. The Trailblazer, as you mentioned, it's not a great defensive card, but it's still bigger than these hero tokens anyway.
Yeah.
That's all it needs to do. And Dufour's got to figure a way out of this fast. We saw the Narset picked up Command the Dreadhorde, but he's going to be going to 13 in the upkeep.
Yeah, 13, and he's guaranteed to take 4 damage on the following turn, at least, probably closer to 5. And there's not even that much in the graveyard to really get back. There's Cavalier Thorns, Risen Reef, and an Omnath, and some Planeswalkers. But none of those gain you life.
None of them gain life, and none of them close particularly quickly. Johnson at 15 and can produce some amount of chump blockers. Looks like there's a little bit of a scuffle about life totals.
Yeah, just a mild discrepancy. Probably came with the Oath of Kaya dealing 2, and maybe Johnson didn't count the add 2. Plus, with those chip damages every turn from the Chandra emblems, things can get a little murky. But that's why we have the spotter there to make sure everything is crystal clear for not only the players, but for you at home.
All right, seems like they might have come to a solution, and Johnson passes it to 4. Now those emblems trigger to 4 to 9.
Oh, so he's going to 13. He was at 17, taking the 4 damage from the emblems. But Command the Dreadhorde's basically his only real play here. You know, he could play the Hero Precinct 1, and if he has like a 3 or 4 mana spell, he can play that. But for the most part, you know, the Command the Dreadhorde is going to be the only thing that kind of matches what he's facing. But it comes at the cost of his life total. And if he takes more than 8 damage from this Command the Dreadhorde, which effectively is just like 2 or 3 things, you know, he's going to be facing down at least 2, maybe 3, or sorry, at least 4, maybe 5 Chandra emblems next turn, and he has no real way to gain life.
Yeah, it's not looking good on Dufour's side of things. So plus this to Fairy. Even sweeper effects are not really effective here. On these Hero Precinct 1s, they don't even main deck Kaya's Wrath in these hero builds.
Yeah, relying on stuff like Hostage Taker and Elite Guard Mage to really pad your life total and protect you from an opposing attacking squad. I think Dufour is just trying to figure out if he has any outs here. Just going through all the iterations, and I'm like 99% sure that there's not really a good way. But, you know, Command the Dreadhorde is an insanely powerful card, and if anything could do it, it would be that.
Well, Hollowed Fountain tapped, not likely to do it as we go back to Christopher Johnson.
Now, Dufour does have the ability to play the Command the Dreadhorde at instant speed, though, thanks to the plus from Teferi. So he's going to see exactly what happens with Johnson's turn. And then now that this attack is coming through, maybe he can bring back a large blocker to take care of some of these attackers.
So Chandra to 8, emblems to 5. And here's an attack with all of the creatures, Omnath, Twister, as well as the Trailblazer. Command the Dreadhorde will be cast before blockers.
I think he's just going to take probably Omnath and Risen Reef. Or sorry, Cavalier Thorns and Omnath. Maybe the Risen Reef too, but that's, what, 9, 12 damage. He's at 13. He's just going to die to the emblems.
Doesn't look good.
Let's see, you could take Cavalier Reef is 8, and he has 5 emblems on him, so he can't do that. So it has to be 7. So he has to go Omnath plus Risen Reef or just Cavalier of Thorns.
Looks like he lands on just Cavalier, so that puts him to 8.
Yeah, but if Johnson actually just has a... or he can just throw some lands at Dufour with the Living Twister. He has the ability to deal 4 damage to Dufour directly with that bounce and throw. And with those 5 emblems, he's just dead on board, basically. Unless he has some way to gain life in his upkeep.
So the Cavalier blocks Omnath, tokens block the other 2. So Omnath gets eaten, tokens die. And as you mentioned, though, that Living Twister should be able to clean things up with those emblems.
No, it is a card that not a lot of people have played with before. Living Twister is rather complex in how it operates. It's not really intuitive, especially the bounce a land and then immediately replay it, like when you need landfall triggers and stuff.
Well, I think more so than that is he can just do it at instant speed, right? There's no real pressure for him to end the game. It's going to happen with inevitability here. So the triggers are going to put Dufour down to 3. It looks like Johnson's going to move now. Living Twister picks up a land, throws a land upstairs, Dufour to 1. Let's do that one again. All right. On to game number 2, Chris Johnson up 1 against David Dufour.
Yeah, really nice stuff from Johnson, just kind of systematically picking apart Dufour. That Chandra, Awakened Inferno, doing a ton of work, just putting those emblems over and over and over again on David Dufour, and couldn't really get out from under the thumb.
All right, so let's check out the sideboards here for Christopher Johnson on Team Elementals. Sideboard is 3 Ether Gust, 3 Cinder Vines, that's a little redundancy on the Chandra in a way, 2 Disdainful Stroke, 2 Flame Sweeps, 3 Fries, and 2 Shifting Ceratops.
I think here you want some ways to interact with the more expensive cards. Those are going to be the better ones in Dufour's deck. I think Disdainful Stroke is pretty good there, but it is a little bit lackluster in the face of something like Teferi Hero of Dominaria, Hero Precinct 1, or Narset Parter of Veils. So I wouldn't blame him for not bringing in the Disdainful Strokes, but I still think that they're probably good enough, especially because you have to assume stuff like Kaya's Wrath is coming in out of the board. I like the 3 copies of Fry. Not only can they take care of Hero, but they take care of those pesky Planeswalkers as the game goes along. And Shifting Ceratops, while again not great against Hero, is phenomenal against all those Planeswalkers because they're usually tapping out for them.
And David Dufour side of things, he needs some help. His sideboard is a D-Spark, a Narset Parter of Veils, 2 Cry of the Carnarium, 2 Dovin's Veto, 2 Duress, 2 Enter the God Eternals, 2 Kaya's Wrath, 2 Elder Spells, and a Bolas's Citadel.
Now, if you look really closely at Johnson's deck, you'll see there's not a whole lot of creatures that have 2 or less toughness. And Cry of the Carnarium feels like it should be pretty good, but ultimately it's just going to kill Llanowar Elves, Creeping Trailblazer, and Risen Reef, and maybe like one other creature like Overgrowth Elemental if it doesn't get a counter. But it might be worthwhile just because sometimes it can trade 1 for 1 or occasionally snag a 2 for 1. So I believe Dufour will probably bring it in, but I don't know how effective it's going to be. D-Spark seems like an okay card to bring in just because he saw Chandra Awakened Inferno as well as Omnath, Locus of the Royal. But it's not going to have too many targets in this specific build. This build is particularly low to the ground. I don't really like Dovin's Veto much. It's a very creature-heavy based deck. Same with Duress. I do like Enter the God Eternals. It's just a way to stifle the bleeding as well as take care of one of those large creatures from the other side. Kaya's Wrath seems like a no-brainer. Dufour might bring in 1 or 2 Elder Spells to help contain those Planeswalkers. Maybe not really sure how many there are. Maybe actually suspects there's way more than 6 because a lot of these decks do play multiple copies of Nisu Shakes the World and the like. And then Bolas's Citadel, I don't know if he really has the ability to pay that life. We saw that game, like he had Command the Dreadhorde, and he could really only do it for 5 because he was just dead to those emblems. But it was probably few and far between in this particular matchup that actually comes up. So Citadel, even though it didn't look good or wouldn't have looked good last game, might actually be something he does want.
Meanwhile, over on StarCityGames.com, we got a sale going. If you like Magic the Gathering cards, which I have to assume you do, maybe check out 10% off on all promo cards through Monday.
Ooh. Some
foils, some non-foils. You see the Techless Lightning Helix there.
I love me some Texas cards, honestly. Especially Texas Cryptic Command. You could just tell your opponent, yeah, it does Swiss Army Knife. It's like your opponent loses the game and another player has to give you their Tarmogoyf.
I believe that the entire Oracle text of Cryptic Command is pick 2.
The end. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, if you go to srcgames.com/sale, you can check out our current sale going on, and that changes through Monday. All promo cards are currently 10% off, but that changes every Monday. So if you're not a huge fan of promo cards, come back Monday and you check out our brand new sale. We do a new sale every week.
And if you are, don't miss your crack at that Door of Destinies.
Yeah.
For your tribal strategy.
There's actually getting to be a lot of tribal synergy artifacts, So you might be able to just go hard on your commander decks with various tribes thanks to Door of Destinies. And now Icon of Ancestry, that's the new one, right?
Yeah.
That card seems sweet.
Maybe build a Constructs deck with all these colorless ones.
And you get to play the, man, what's it called? Mystic something or another. That's the Experimental Frenzy for colorless cards.
Oh, yeah. Something Forge, right?
I think it's Mystic Forge.
That sounds right.
Yeah, that card seems awesome.
Yeah, it's a neat one.
I mean, I know some Affinity decks are already playing Experimental Frenzy in Modern, and this just feels like a version that lets you still cast cards in your hand.
I saw a pretty sick deck. I think Canister tweeted he was going to be playing it. It's
Please, vintage. Please say vintage.
No, it's Modern.
Okay.
It's a Mystic Forge deck. Just a bunch of colorless cards. It does the charge counter thing. Was it Surge Node, I want to say, is the card?
Yeah.
Then you play Astral Cornucopia and Everflowing Chalice, and it's just every card's colorless.
And every card costs 0.
Many of them cost 0.
Does it play Retract in a way to gain a bunch of cards whenever you draw things, or maybe Paradoxical Outcome?
The only colored mana sources were islands for sideboard spell skites.
Oh. How do you actually win?
I don't remember.
Sounds like a canister deck.
We see Dufour on a mulligan here. When we're looking at the sideboard, you saw a lot of cards like Duress that only handle non-creature spells. You know, the Elder Spell is only good for Planeswalkers. Some targeted removal for creatures. But really the strength of this Team Elementals deck is that it hits you with creatures and Planeswalkers.
Yep.
And also can often have just cast triggers that are good. I know Paul Mulder's putting in good work with Hydroid Krasis. A lot of ways to build this Teamer deck where you just ignore broad categories of cards.
Yeah, and I think it's honestly really sweet in how these decks are built in that regard, just because most mid-range decks, they don't really falter if your opponent hits you on one front. That's why you play mid-range, because you don't really have any weaknesses to exploit. In the past year, we've had Golgari where it's really creature-heavy, so the Wrath effects were quite good against them. But nowadays, with so many Planeswalkers like Nisu Shakes the World, all these new Chandras, and a number of other Planeswalkers that you can play, you're just no longer vulnerable to one type of card.
Both players have their colors online as the game's starting here. First play, David Dufour is a turn 3 Narset. He'll minus that right away.
Something that's kind of interesting to note from Christopher Johnson's specific build of Team Elementals is that he's not that vulnerable to Noxious Grasp because his Planeswalkers are red. A lot of times, you'll see Hydroid Krasis in these decks. Nisu Shakes the World. Noxious Grasp's just a home run against these elemental decks. But here, it doesn't take care of Chandra Awakened Inferno, which there are 2 copies. It doesn't take care of Chandra Acolyte of Flame, which there are 4 copies.
You saw a shock end step for Johnson on that Narset.
Effectively trading a shock for a -2, which I think is a very reasonable trade-off.
Play a Stomping Ground untapped, go to 18. The play for turn is Risen Reef.
Yeah, and even though this goes to hand, if it's not a land, it is not technically drawing a card. I know that it looks like he drew a card, but it is technically not.
There's a lot of weird interactions like that in Standard, where stuff seems like it should work against stuff, and there's weird workarounds and corner cases.
Oh, you talking about when things say can't be countered and yet Ether Gust?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exiling cards from hand so that they don't hit Nullhide Ferox.
I'm actually really surprised Johnson has so many red cards in his hand right now. I feel like he probably should have gotten some of these Lightning Strikes and Shocks out of his deck. Now, they are good against Hero Precinct 1, but you have to assume the Esper Hero decks are going to get Hero Precinct 1 out of their deck in favor of those Kaya's Wraths.
Thought Erasure resolved pretty quickly for Dufour. That was the card he found off Narset. We saw a Living Twister go to the graveyard. Was that 3 Lightning Strikes in Johnson's hand?
I believe it was 3 Lightning Strikes, a Fry, and I don't know the last card.
Tyrant Scorn will take care of the Risen Reef, and we'll go to Johnson's side.
Definitely wasn't a Planeswalker, because that would have almost 100% gotten taken over the Living Twister.
Right. Leafkin Druid's the play, no land for Johnson, and we'll go back to Dufour.
3 mana here. Going to be a Time Raveler. Now he's going to bounce this Leafkin Druid, and he's fully aware that there's burn in Johnson's hand. He's content just letting it get hit by a Lightning Strike or something, because she's going to take up most of Johnson's turn. And he still got to draw a card out of it and bounce that Leafkin Druid and really stifle his development.
Yes, Teferi went to 1, back to Johnson's turn. As I mentioned, the mana pretty constrained here. Lightning Strike and Fry all cost 2 mana. That Druid costs 2 mana. Without a land drop, you can only do one thing. Okay, so he drew the land, found Hinterland Harbor, so Leafkin Druid plus Lightning Strike on Teferi.
Yeah, so he's kind of turning still. He's also got Fry in hand, which can answer that Teferi Hero of Dominaria that might come down here this turn.
Dufour has a Hostage Taker in hand, though can't convert that one right away. It would just die to the Lightning Strike.
Yeah, probably wants to wait a little bit on it, but he might just want to kind of tempo Johnson out. He plays this. He's just going to kind of trade Hostage Taker for a Lightning Strike or a Fry or something. Just kind of grind him out of resources because he just doesn't have really anything else to play.
So he does cast the Hostage Taker. Hostage Taker will grab the Leafkin Druid. Go back to Johnson's turn. Lightning Strike on Hostage Taker. Get my Druid back.
Yeah, and he's doing this now just because he doesn't want Dufour to have any way to protect it.
All right, so we're back on Dufour's turn. Kaya's Wrath on Leafkin Druid. That seems a bit aggressive.
Honestly, I kind of love it. He knows that at this point, you know, if Johnson just hits 6 mana, there's a chance he just gets colded by Chandra Awakened Inferno. And Johnson just has a bunch of burn spells in hand. That's effectively a 4-mana Stone Rain at this point, and he's been kind of constricting his mana for the last few turns on purpose.
Omnath will be the play for Johnson. It takes down Narset.
Yeah, but that one's not a huge deal because Johnson doesn't actually have stuff in his deck that says draw a card, so a Narset on 1 is effectively the same as a Narset that doesn't exist. Outside of the Elder Spell, of course, maybe putting some counters on it. Might actually be actively worse because he could potentially bring it back with a Command the Dreadhorde in a few turns.
Dufour is going to continue to miss that 5th land drop. He just draws and passes.
Yeah, but luckily for him, Johnson also just missing a bunch of land drops. But here's a really, really good card here when Dufour is kind of stumbling on mana. Chandra,
Acolyte of
Flame is going to start churning out some of these elemental tokens to attack for 2 points of damage every turn. And then at some point, if Dufour plays something worth targeting with Lightning Strike or Fry, you can just rebuy it with the -2.
So D-Spark takes care of the Omnath. Presumably we'll see 2 elementals coming across here.
Yeah, they're just getting those out the box. They go away at the end of turn, so there's no real reason to be too picky about them unless some blocks are being assigned.
Dufour to 18 off that. And this Chandra is really the reason that you see Johnson reaching for more red spells than we usually see in these elemental decks. The Lightning Strikes are really good at the -2 on this Chandra. So he actually has just a ton of burn at his disposal now because of the Chandra.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I want to note about the Chandra Acolyte of Flame is that it plays in a lot of ways like the old Jace Vryn's Prodigy. When it transformed, you had the ability to minus and play something out of the graveyard, plus usually just to gain some loyalty, but sometimes you got to shrink your opponent's stuff. But for 3 mana as the original investment, you know, you just get to be aggressive with it too, which is really cool.
So Dufour shocked to 16 to cast a Hero of Dominaria, drew a card on tap 2 lands. On Johnson's turn, it's going to get eaten by the Fry. It's been in the hand for a while. 2 elementals show up, attack Dufour to 14. Looks like Johnson also had his 5th land drop. And we'll go back to Dufour.
Got a 6 mana. Looks like he's got Command the Dreadhorde, so he might go for a big turn here with 14 life to work with. But he's got to be aware that Johnson probably still has at least 1 Lightning Strike in hand, and he can use another Lightning Strike with the Chandra Acolyte of Flame on the following turn. He might be out of Lightning Strikes. I'm not 100% if he had 3 Lightning Strikes or not.
So there's 2 in the graveyard.
As far as I can recall, he's played all the cards that I remember.
I thought that I had seen 3, but I'm not positive.
If he does have 3, that means that Dufour is effectively at 8 unless the Hero of Dominaria minuses on the Acolyte of Flame.
So here's Command the Dreadhorde. Johnson has a response. It's Lightning Strike targeting you. Dufour to 11. That answers the Lightning Strike question.
Yeah, and he has to do that right now because otherwise Dufour can get back Time Raveler, and that means that Johnson can't cast the spell with this current mana.
So here's another interesting layer. We were talking a little bit about weird interactions. So Teferi Time Raveler is really good against Dreadhorde Arcanist because you cast cards from your graveyard during combat, which you can't. It's not a sorcery speed action, so Time Raveler shuts that off.
Yep.
But Chandra Acolyte of Flame just lets you cast the spell. You do that in your main phase.
Yeah, cast it as part of a resolution of the ability itself.
So Narset and Living Twister are the picks on the Command the Dreadhorde. So that's 6. So Dufour falls to 5 off of this. Narset -2s. Finds Enter the God Eternals.
It's probably one of the least scary Command the Dreadhordes I've seen in recent memory, but you know, it is something to get Dufour back in the game. He was a little low on resources. You know, he's facing down that Chandra Acolyte of Flame, needs to get off the battlefield, but Living Twister is not exactly ideal here. It's just a 2/5, doesn't have red mana to activate the ability.
Yeah, can't really do much with it outside of block elementals, which he kind of needs a little bit of help in that department.
Johnson just looking for one more burn spell to get the job done here. Can minus the Chandra and Lightning Strike or fry something, but it's not quite lethal.
Shock for a Breeding Pool to 16. Here's a tap of 6. That's not good. Chandra Awakened Inferno showing up again.
Yeah, and he's just going to go ahead and put an emblem on, sending Chandra to 8 loyalty. And Dufour's got his work cut out for him here. Now, that's 1 damage guaranteed. Johnson can also just plus the shot. Both Chandras basically up by 1 thanks to the loyalty gain mechanic from Acolyte of Flame. Or you can just chip David down to effectively 3 life.
He goes for the damage, makes those elementals. 1 is blocked by the Twister, but Dufour to 4 and to 3 in the upkeep.
Yeah, but he does have Enter the God Eternals, which he can technically cast on his own Living Twister if he so chooses. Create a 4/4, gain some life.
He'll start by putting the Narset down to 1, looking for some more help. Another copy of Enter the God Eternals. And this could actually turn into a pretty reasonable clock and a good amount of life gain.
Yeah, it's funny, too, because I'm pretty sure Dufour actually has an Despark in hand, too. So he actually has an answer to the Awakened Inferno.
With 6 mana, though, ooh, that's a little tight. You'd love to have 7 so you could Dispark and Enter the God Eternals. So the Living Inferno is going to attack the little Chandra down to 2 loyalty. Now here's Enter the God Eternals on the Twister. He'll go to 7.
Yeah, 5 mana 4/4 that gains 4 life. He's going to mill himself here. We get to get that new Cedric Phillips army token out.
It's a nice one.
Yeah, it's sweet. I'm jealous.
Wait a minute.
No.
That ain't right.
You better not. I'm mad. So I bet Cedric's more mad, though.
You hate to see it.
We're going to get that fixed for you.
There we go. So Dufour had the 7th land, but it's a water grave. To play that one tapped, got to be a little protective of the life total, though shocking versus desparking the Chandra now is an interesting question.
I mean, it's another emblem, but now that he has 7 land and it hasn't shocked, next turn what he can do is kill any potential blocker, grow the 4/4 to an 8/8, and despark the Chandra so there's no way for Johnson to take care of the token. Now, if Johnson's heads up here, which it looks like he's going to go ahead and kill that Cedric Phillips 4/4, so there's no 8/8 attacking next turn. And now he just needs to find a way to put a roadblock in front of that Living Twister.
So, ooh.
Whoa.
Nice sequence here for Johnson. Chandra takes down the token, and here's shifting
That's
Ceratops.
game. That's game, boys.
2 elemental tokens. Give that haste.
Boom.
That's 7 damage. Chris Johnson, 2-0 over David Dufour.
Once again, we'll see shifting Ceratops just coming down.